As probably many of you know, our base is in New York, and we were always frustrated about the lack of traffic coming from the UK. However, I came home from time to time, and there was one person who always invited me out for a coffee, and it was Niku Banaie. And we used to spend several coffees just talking about what I was finding, what was inspiring me. And he talked about some of the inspiration that he was seeing around the trends and what he was using to inspire his clients. So when we decided to do the conference in London, Niku was one of the first persons I wanted to talk, because I wanted him to share some of the great ideas that he'd been telling me, and just inspire the audience here today. So I wonder if you'd welcome Niku Banaie.
Thanks, Piers. I was quite flattered to speak here today, but Piers gave me a very kind of open brief to almost replicate some of the conversations that Piers and I have had via email, via his blog, and via telephone conversations. And that can be quite a daunting thing, because it can be really broad and kind of random, and it's going to be a little bit like that, unfortunately. But in the style of Petra Kutscher, which is kind of a general chit-chat, I'm going to take you through a kind of mini journey of kind of ideas that we've been talking about at Naked, that have got us excited, have intrigued us, and got us asking questions. And I just want to share that with you for the next 25 minutes. Before I do that, I want to kind of take you through a little story, a story that has inspired myself, and especially inspired me this year for an occasion that happened. I'll explain that in a second. Let me just take you back. The year's 1921. It's Birmingham. A young man by the name of Jim Crompton is born. He's born into a pretty poor family. They don't have much to get by. He's a bit of a scrapper and a bit of a street kid, and he's quite entrepreneurial. And as his mother moves to the East End of London, she sets up a fish and chip store. And he sees this as an opportunity to make some money. But he sees this from a very simple perspective, that it was the time just after the war, and he realized that people were in need of some fun and some playfulness. And he was fascinated by games and gaming. And so he started to operate a pin table in his mother's fish and chip store. Now, this pin table started to generate more money than his mother's chips did. And so he thought there's an opportunity here, and he started to buy more of these pin tables and started to take them around London and started to operate them in other stores. So much so that it stunted his growth, because he couldn't afford a van, and he had to carry these machines on his back, and he stopped growing at about 5 foot. His first invention came with a machine that was called the Film Star. Now, what was great about this invention in 1956 was that it was the first multiplayer game using coins, the first coin-operated game. His next invention came in 1963 with a machine which was the world's first coin-operated pusher. So some of you are familiar with the British seaside, the machines that you put 10p in and it pushes the money on the kind of slates. This was the very first iteration of that machine. His final big invention and his defining moment was in 1964 with something called the penny falls. And now this has become like the Hoover of the kind of gaming industry. This platform has inspired arcade games and gambling machines even to this day forth. What was really impressive was that these machines weren't just machines. These were kind of huge attractions back in those days, huge things that inspired people and entertained people, both in the UK and abroad. And what Jim took, and this is him here in the early days, operating some of his machines and selling them on, was that he was an extremely inspiring man for the simple way of how he generated ideas and saw opportunities, anticipated change where others hadn't have done so in the time. Sadly, Jim, he passed away this year. He was my grandfather. He passed away this year. But he passed on some very simple messages to me, and that was that by looking at opportunities and very simple needs when it comes to us as people, that if you look at them in the most simple and basic way, it's actually a very simple platform to try and anticipate and see change and see stuff that's going on. So today I just want to look at stuff that's happening right now, actually. And I'm not saying these are trends. These are purely observations on things that I think that might inspire you guys. These are things Piers and I have been talking about. And these are things that may go on to influence bigger things in the near future. one of the things I just wanted to show you really quickly is one of his really early machines from the 50s, and this was a skiing simulator. And what I found great about this was that someone back in Aiken actually said, that actually looks like a Namco machine from today, which is there. And it just again proved to me that Jim was quite a special guy. He anticipated the way people wanted to interact with products and anticipate and entertain themselves. And he inspired me for this particular presentation, which has changed all my fonts. This isn't actually the original font. So if things are going to look out of place, please forgive me. But the conversations can be random and quite haphazard. But what I wanted to do today was try to contain them into kind of a couple of areas. The first one is our need for love, our need to learn, our need to give back, our need for simplicity, and our need for play. And we've started to touch on some of these areas today. And a lot of the guys this morning were touching on some of these kind of concepts. And I've just tried to use these as a way to give me a kind of guide and a way to classify and structure my conversation today. So the first one, again, apologies for the font, is the need for love. And my question is where's the love in our connected world? Everyone's talking about social networking and having more friends than anyone else and chatting with all these great new people. And it's a massive boom that's going on. But something that we've been discussing is that there seems to be something kind of fundamentally missing from all these connections, and that is the kind of emotional one. And it's either missing or it's kind of reforming itself in the way that we're starting to see new generations creating friendships that are kind of based on different parameters than friendships were based on even 10 years ago. And something that kind of brought this to light was this article that came out at the end of last year that a young guy, Gabe Henderson, closed down his MySpace and Facebook's accounts because he felt it was just too superficial and he wasn't getting the emotional connection that he deserved. This was also supplemented by a piece of research that Duke University did that came out last year as well, saying that Americans are lonelier than they ever have been. It's due to a number of reasons: more work schedules, longer commutes, later marriages, but also the internet. And the internet has facilitated this kind of loneliness that's happened. Everyone's talking about this great place to meet and become friends, but this kind of friendship dynamic isn't kind of what I know as pure friendship. And it's got us talking about it and realizing that the social aptitude has suffered because of the disuse of kind of face-to-face contact. And again, Timo from Nokia was talking about the importance of face-to-face. And we feel that that's something it's missing. And there's some things in technology, and when technology is looked at in a very pure sense, people miss the emotional aspect out of it. And we've seen some projects on the web recently that seem to try to kind of challenge that and try to even replace it. And here's something that some of you may have seen, 5 Minute Friends, a project on the web where it's actually quite an interesting way to say that it's a reflection of how we represent our friendship on the internet, this constant desire to be connected. It's almost like a perfect modern day time limit, that you only have friends for 5 minutes and then you never see them again. So I went out on the web to try this out. I hanged out there for 25 minutes and no one turned up. And I thought, oh my God, the web is quite a lonely place. And if projects like this aren't kind of kicking it off, what will? And what has been quite successful and quite interesting is The Guardian, something completely different. But The Guardian has moved digitally. They've changed their whole proposition, which I thought I'd just share with you because it's actually quite interesting. They were traditionally looked at themselves as a daily national liberal newspaper. Their proposition now is the world's leading liberal voice, which starts to reframe what they do in kind of our digital connected world. But what I found really interesting when I was speaking to the head of digital at The Guardian was that the bit that actually is most successful on the digital platform for The Guardian is their Guardian Soulmates. So where people are hooking up with each other is the most successful bit of their digital business and the bit that's making them the most money, the bit that's got the largest traffic going through it. It's called the Hug T-shirt. Now, I don't necessarily love this idea, but I think it's an interesting initiative to see how they can bring emotion back into technology and where some of the internet social networking sites start to miss something. And it's a very simple concept that we realize from a scientific point of view that we need to be touched around 70 times a day to be healthy. And this just takes that concept to connect the digital to the physical, what some of you guys were talking about earlier this morning. Simply, you can send via Bluetooth app feelings of warmth and vibration to your T-shirt. which is quite interesting. I can probably anticipate the first industry that I might imagine to pick this up. No second guessing there. So that was kind of the first kind of section on the need for love. The next need is this kind of need to learn. And what history has proved is that education and discovery are best advanced when knowledge is shared. And we are kind of living in open source times, and people were talking this morning that actually the best way for us all to learn, whether it's about green, whether it's about sustainability, whatever it's about for us to share. And the internet has provided a brilliant platform to do that. And open source has been one of the biggest proponents of that as well. Now, from a couple of different perspectives, there's been some great initiatives. Now, some of these aren't exactly new, but they're growing in momentum and gathering greater power in how they're delivering this concept of learning around the world. The first one is the MIT. The MIT have been great, and I'm going to show a number of examples from the MIT, which started out as kind of embryonic ideas in a lab that have now started to gain mass popularity. The first one is MIT OpenCourseware. And this is where basically they opened up their complete faculties and their course programs on the web and allowed everyone to access. So self-educators, teachers, whoever it is around the world to access the curriculum at the MIT. It's not going to mean you're going to turn into an MIT professor, but you have access to how they learn and what they're teaching their particular students. Next one out of the MIT as well is the Fab Lab. Now, Tamara was talking about the way to fabricate concepts very quickly and prototyping. And this is exactly what this idea is about, but it's empowering people in third world countries to do just that. Someone on Naked described this very well. They were saying that in short, what we used to do was to give money to help people in the third world. Then we started to give them tools in the third world. And then finally, what this idea does is kind of give people the tools to make the tools. So this lab travels to all these places around the world, and it has some quite hardcore industrial grade technology. So for example, there's things like, industrial grade fabrication lasers, electrical tools, wrapped in open source software created by programmers at the MIT. So really high-end stuff. I didn't actually know what it was, but it was quite interesting to see how they're taking this concept around the world and empowering kind of local individuals to make their own tools and fast prototype stuff that's going to make a difference in their local communities. Now, taking that to a slightly different angle from this concern of trying to learn is that to share, we can learn a lot from each other. And there's this beta version of a website called Expo TV where simply people are making video opinions about products. That's pretty much what this site is about. But what is really interesting is that people have talked about the power shift from consumers to brands, etc., for a number of years. This is quite interesting because people are coming on here and just talking about random products like nappies, toothpastes, and just giving their honest opinion about what they think, why they think they're good. And sites like these are starting to kind of get quite a lot of momentum on the web, and it's quite interesting that we're starting to listen to each other more about what we think is good. And another example that seems to tap into this is this website called Instructables, which was born out of MIT initiative as well, where simply you share how to make things and you figure them out together as a group of individuals. And again, it's taking that premise of open source, but applying it into very everyday, nice examples of how we go about learning things. And it's quite interesting because the stuff that people are doing are really, actually really quite cute. So, you know, here people are teaching others how to make apple sauce and how to can it. And these are the kind of stuff that, you know, the web wasn't built for this. Well, people didn't think the web was built for this back in the day, but, you know, this is the way that it's becoming popular and how we're starting to share knowledge amongst ourselves. And we're starting to see this behavior of learning from each other manifest in other, probably more commercial aspects. Another beta website that's out at the moment called Crowdstorm. They're calling social shopping 2.0. And basically, it's about ranking. Products go to the top based on their level of buzziness, so the level of recommends people are putting towards those things. Now, I'm sure this could be open to abuse, but what is quite interesting is that, again, we're becoming more comfortable by listening to what each other think is good and learning from each other, from learning from each other's experience. Some of you may have seen this example. It's based in Tokyo. It's been around for a couple of years. What's interesting about ranking Queen, which is a store, it's not some kind of drag queen singer from East London or something, but it's, they rank all the top products by categories of the top 3 or 5 or 10 items. So these are things like the top 3 bath powders, the top 3 toothpicks, the top 3 pasta sauces. And what's really interesting about this idea is it kind of goes against the whole long tail theory, the whole kind of mass and broadening taste kind of concepts that everyone's been talking about. It's just taking the most generic things that we're all buying, and it takes independent research from what's selling in the big department stores and from independent research and saying, right, these are the things that everyone wants, and these are the top things, and it kind of stocks them in that way. So again, a way for us to learn from our behaviors is becoming manifest in this particular store. Then finally, under this kind of concept of learn, is a video game, online game called Disaffected. And what I found quite interesting in this particular game was that it's not there to promote entertainment in the purest sense. It's here to actually take a social moral message out to people who play the game, because it sets itself in FedEx Kinko's environment, and you have to be a player that helps work against disenfranchised customers, people who aren't getting their products that they want, and people who basically got low morale in a big organization and big company. And it's quite a funny game. It's probably worth playing. But again, it's a very interesting way of how people are taking that kind of learning idea and applying it in a kind of left field idea. You can kind of see the environment here where people have to run around and serve customers very quickly. Now, this next one is stuff that people have been talking about this morning, and I'm sure people will be talking about way after this session, have been talking about for the last couple of years. And the way that we've been kind of seeing it is this kind of notion of, yes, there's all this stuff going on, there's green marketing, green movement, sustainability. But what I wanted to present today was that I think that we all want to do good things, and we all want to do our own little bit. And sometimes that the barriers, there's some perceived barriers about what we can do and about the level and impact of change that we can make. And we've seen terms like food miles, fair trade, provenance, carbon neutral, organic, and they've entered the mainstream, as we've talked about this morning. But what's been great is the way that the web has allowed us to actually make little steps into making a kind of bigger difference. The first one is not actually a web example, but it's actually one that I think John touched on earlier, which was that there's a stat from the UN, which I'll just read out, which was that over 60% of the world's population will live in urban areas by the year 2030, which means that agriculture will need to be planned into growing cities to ensure self-sufficiency and strong communities. And that's for me, quite a pressing concern when there isn't that much green space left. But what you're starting to see from a very grassroots perspective are allotments. Now, allotments have been around since my youth, but what we're seeing now is that they're full, and there's waiting lists for people to get onto an allotment site, which starts to signal to me that there's people that, yes, they want to grow their own, back to this local, back to freshness, but also that they're realizing that they don't want to have to buy from supermarkets. And I think that we're going to start to see some more initiatives from local councils to try and promote greenness and growing your own in different perspectives. From a slightly different angle about giving back, a company that I find quite fascinating is Patagonia, who've been around for about 20 or 30 years. And the thing that I particularly want to share with you today is the way that they encourage and inspire their own employees to get behind this kind of sustainable and looking after our world notion. Now, the founder has a very good philosophy. He said he has an MBA, which for him means management by absence, which means that when the surf's good, he goes surfing. When the snow's fresh, he's going to go snowboarding or mountain climbing. This guy's in his 60s. And this is the philosophy that he runs his company by, and it's really refreshing because the notion goes back onto the employees to, yes, you can have fun, but you need to respect and enjoy the world we live in. But what's really interesting is this kind of element of environmental activism. Now, he provides all his employees with a get-out-of-jail-free card, which, if they get arrested during an environmental protest, the company will bail them out. So he's actively encouraging them to speak up, with their message. And I think that from a kind of organizational perspective, this is quite an interesting way of kind of companies getting some of their employees quite excited. Next example is, I believe, the first peer-to-peer distributed micro-loan site, which basically allows you to invest in entrepreneurs in developing countries. Now, we already talked about, well, sometimes people feel with NGOs and things like this that they feel extremely dislocated from the process of helping these countries out and helping individuals in those countries out. And people talked earlier about engagement. How can we feel more part of the process? And this example is a very powerful one that allows people to feel engaged in the process, because not only can you choose the types of entrepreneurs that you'd wish to support, you're actively involved in the process of how they develop and how they mature and how they're helping in their particular local community. I think ideas like these are the ones that will start to help us understand some of the innovations that will start to make those differences, the differences that we can make here connected to other people in other places around the world. And John mentioned earlier Free Cycle. I'm a big fan. Again, it's one of those things where the internet has made a massive difference. We all know it has the power to make markets more efficient. And what Free Cycle simply does, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like a reverse eBay. So you join a free cycling email list server in your community, and stuff you want to get rid of, you just kind of list it on email and someone will come and pick it up. And that's pretty much it. But you don't throw away, you just pass on. And that's the premise of this kind of very simple idea, but seeming to gain a lot of popularity. Next area is the need for simplicity. It just seems that we're getting bombarded from all sides all the time. And some people are referring to our generation as kind of the impatient generation, because we get annoyed when a website doesn't take, it takes more than 5 seconds to load, and technology that we just get too frustrated by. And there's another phrase that people talk about, which is, our lives are becoming more full all the time, and technology's been great at helping us accommodate that. But it's also made us uncomfortably full. Like when you've eaten too much pasta or something, you can just about move. And it's that kind of feeling that some of the technology is starting to kind of embody within us. And we've seen a lot of products and brands talking about simplicity, and it's something that's been a mantra in the marketplace, whether it's Citibank talking about their simplicity credit card, or Ford with their keep it simple pricing policy. But unfortunately, the way we see it is that when people bring out new products, new and improved, it usually means more, and it just means more of stuff. It kind of links to some of the social sustainability stuff we were talking earlier. But I'm going to kind of look at it from a different angle here, from the kind of user experience and the user interface perspective. Now, one of the most complex things on the earth is Google, and they have managed the trick to make more appeal less by one of the most simple interfaces on the web. And I think that Craigslist is a good example of that, and I think you're going to probably see more examples of pure simplicity being applied to the user interface. And some of this has been driven by something that I'm sure all of you will recognize straight away, but one of the most pervasive, what people call the most simple design products that has ever been about, apart from the paperclip that we saw previously. And you've seen how this product has evolved. It's become more simpler in its iterations. But what's really interesting is that what if we start just by thinking that, if you have like software programs that ship with 10% fewer features, but you can charge 10% higher costs just because they're slightly more designed in a more simpler way. iPod have done that. Why can't we start applying that to many other different products that exist? And I think that some of you may know John Maeda, professor at the MIT as well, and he just released his laws of simplicity. I just wanted to share the very simple one with you, which is he terms as SHE, and it refers to shrink, hide, and embody. Shrink means the size, the thinness of your particular product or your experience. Hide, which is about hiding your particular products, the keys. So you saw this trend in clamshell phones. It was all about hiding the complexity of the buttons, all the features, because people just thought phones were getting too complex. Then finally, embody. Once you've shrunk and hidden everything, how do you add value to something? You have to embody it with something. So the way a Bang & Olufsen remote is quite heavy, is purposely designed to be quite heavy, embodies an aspect of quality and value. And we have to think about these things in the context of when we're shrinking it in this aspect. I'm going to have to rush. I'm getting signals from peers. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was the $100 laptop. Now, most of you have heard about this, and it's been a great example of simplicity, taking what is really expensive, shrinking it down into something that's going to cost $100. But what I found really interesting about this, and it hasn't been talked about, is actually the user interface that will be on this particular product, because we haven't seen a different operating user interface since the launch of the Apple Mac in '84. So for 30 years, we haven't seen a different computer user interface. We've got used to the desktop theme and analogy. What the guys have created with the $100 laptop is something called Sugar, which is represented something like this, and I'll show you some more images in a second. But it's built on the premise that you start with yourself and your home and your closest activity at your heart, and you zoom out to what your friends are doing, and then you zoom out again to what your neighborhood are doing. And to show an example of this interface, this is what it's going to look like. So for these kids, and you've got to remember, these will be kids that will be using this application, and so they've probably never used a computer before. And so the guys have created something here which has got email, word processor, a photography program, a web browser, instant messenger, and an ebook reader. And those are the only applications on there. But then what's really interesting is that when you take it out again, you start to then see how this particular user face really applies to some of the new behaviors that we're starting to see on the web. So here, you start to see people clustering in groups when they're networking and talking about a school project, for example. You start to see them when they start to share work and video within this kind of environment. And what, for me, I found is really interesting, not only does this particular image look very similar to the iPod interface, but it's the way that the guys, and Niku Banaie, the famous professor who's behind this program, have started to challenge how we interface with technology and to bring the emotional aspect and the social aspect back into a user interface for this century. Moving again to something which, for me, is the most simple aspect of design is when it doesn't even seem to be design. There's a Wi-Fi umbrella that was brought out as a prototype product which would signal to you when it's about to rain. So you know when to take your umbrella out. And it's connected to your weather, BBC weather on your computer, for example. And it's just a very, very simple, unpervasive piece of design which is simple at its heart and signifies a very simple use. Where I think it gets abused is where ideas like FlexPets, and I hope there's no one here from FlexPets here today, whereby you can basically, to take the complexity out of a life of owning a pet, you can rent one. And you can rent it for periods of a couple of hours, a couple of days, and then you return it. And this is a real business that operates in San Fran, LA, and I think in San Diego. And this kind of upset me, this idea, because I felt that this is taking the notion of simplicity in the complex world slightly, and forgets the emotional aspect out of the equation. Next thing, I'm sure we'll be renting babies or something. The final area is the need for play. Now, we shouldn't take ourselves seriously all the time, and I think the aspect of play is critical and super important in our day-to-day work and life. And here are just a couple of ideas, pretty random, quite fun, that we've just been talking about, again, amongst ourselves. The first one is this climbing wall in Tokyo, in Japan. Now, what we found really interesting about this is that gyms aren't the typical place to find inspiration and fun, playful environments. And what the guys here have done is put picture frames, mirrors, deer heads, bird cages, flower vases on this particular climbing wall to almost like reframe the concept of a climbing wall within the inner city environment. So you don't have any pretense that you're climbing up the side of the mountain because you never were in the first place. So actually, why don't you just do something more fun with it? Next one is this thing called the Dutch tub, which is kind of an old-fashioned wood-fired hot tub, barbecue and transportable little tub all in one. And what I've just found particularly interesting about this, again, it's this kind of reframing of what the product use is and how you can adapt it in light of things that are going on. So again, you can see the guys taking it on their canoe down the river and having a nice little orgy somewhere in the woods. We've been doing quite a lot of work designing kind of brand experiences for certain brands, and this idea from a school in Denmark really inspired us because the approach that the particular architects took in this was quite inspiring. They divided the areas of this school into three kind of zones. One was for peace and absorption, one was for discussion and cooperation, and one was for security and presence. And we found, and here's some more pictures, we found this extremely exciting because it actually starts to realize the spatial environment and how we use things are important to both work and play and teaching and learning, and things that we found extremely applicable within some of the work that we've been doing. The final idea here is for the Nintendo Mii. I'm not sure if everyone has a Mii on their Wii platform. This is my one, that's me. It's, for those of you who don't know, the Mii is a digital avatar that sits within the Nintendo Wii platform. After you create it, your little guy can go and play games within this world. And the reason I've got it here and why I think it's quite significant is that some analysts are saying that this could potentially be one of the next big social networking movements online. And Nintendo are going to be creating their own Mii channel. So people just go on there and they do stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, they vote for their Miis. Who's got the most popular Mii? Who's designed the most funniest looking Mii? So you can start to see what they look like. They were inspired by a Japanese souvenir called the Kakeshi, and people have gone on to design things like Tony Blair one, Chuck Norris one, Jimmy Carr one, even a Bush one, and then finally, of course, Michael Jackson one. And so you start to see all of these ones in this environment, and people are having a lot of fun and in a very playful manner to create these avatars in a way that enhances their gaming experience. But it's going beyond just gaming. This is where the kind of social networking meets gaming, meets kind of identity, starts to all mesh together in this kind of, in our connected world. And here's an example, and I'm not going to let this play for the whole way, but it's just quite bewildering for me because once you've designed your Mii, you go to share them and see who's got the most popular one with others within your network. And you put them on parade. And this is kind of what the parade looks like. I think I just spotted the Jesus Mii on there as well. There's so many. So you get the idea, these things just are there, and it's bewildering. It doesn't play a pure function, but it's extremely playful, and people are learning and talking to themselves and interacting in this new social world that's being created. And finally, just to finish on, in the spirit of not taking ourselves too seriously and letting your hair down sometimes, there was a project that myself and a friend at Naked were involved in for Nokia. And it was to try and reflect the spontaneity of mobile devices, and especially the video taking applications that you get in mobile devices. We were making films along with the likes of Gary Oldman, and we've never made a film before in our life. It was quite intimidating having to do stuff that's going to get compared to these world-class actor-directors. And I'm going to stick to my day job, luckily, but here is just to kind of promote the spirit of curiosity, to go out and try new things, and to be inspired by things that you may not think are inspiration in the most obvious sense. And in this instance, we were inspired by girls' chit-chat at bus stops, and you'll see how it manifested itself.
You see why I stick to my day job.